John Breckinridge was a lawyer and politician from the U.S. state of Virginia. He served in the state legislatures of Virginia and Kentucky before being elected to the U.S. Senate and appointed United States Attorney General during the second term of President Thomas Jefferson. He is the progenitor of Kentucky's Breckinridge political family and the namesake of Breckinridge County, Kentucky. Breckinridge's father was a local politician, and his mother was a member of the Preston political family. Breckinridge attended the William and Mary College intermittently between 1780 and 1784. His attendance was interrupted by the Revolutionary War and his election to the Virginia House of Delegates. One of the youngest members of that body, his political activities acquainted him with many prominent politicians. In 1785, he married Polly Cabell, a member of the Cabell political family. Despite making a comfortable living through a combination of legal and agricultural endeavors, letters from relatives in Kentucky convinced him to move to the western frontier. He established Cabellsdale, his plantation, near Lexington, Kentucky, in 1793. Breckinridge was appointed as the state's Attorney General soon after arriving. In November 1797, he resigned and was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives the next month. As a legislator, he secured passage of a more humane criminal code that abolished the death penalty for all offenses except first-degree murder. On a 1798 trip to Virginia, an intermediary gave him Thomas Jefferson's Kentucky resolutions, which denounced the Alien and Sedition Acts. At Jefferson's request, Breckinridge assumed credit for the modified resolutions he shepherded through the Kentucky General Assembly. Jefferson's authorship was not discovered until after Breckinridge's death. He opposed calling a state constitutional convention in 1799 but was elected as a delegate. Due to his influence, the state's government remained comparatively aristocratic, maintaining protections for slavery and limiting the power of the electorate. Called the father of the resultant constitution, he emerged from the convention as the acknowledged leader of the state's Democratic-Republican Party and was selected Speaker of the Kentucky House of Representatives in 1799 and 1800. Elected to the U.S. Senate in 1800, Breckinridge functioned as Jefferson's floor leader, guiding administration bills through the chamber that was narrowly controlled by his party. Residents of the western frontier called for his nomination as vice president in 1804, but Jefferson appointed him as U.S. Attorney General in 1805 instead. He was the first cabinet-level official from the West but had little impact before his death from tuberculosis on December 14, 1806. Early life and family. John Breckinridge's grandfather, Alexander Breckinridge, immigrated from Maryland to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, around 1728. In 1740, the family moved to Augusta County, Virginia, near the city of Staunton. John Breckinridge was born there on December 2, 1760, the second of 6 children of Robert Breckinridge and his second wife, Lettice Breckinridge. His mother was the daughter of John Preston of Virginia's Preston political family. Robert Breckinridge had 2 children by a previous marriage, and it was through one of these half-brothers that John Breckinridge was uncle to future Congressman James D. Breckinridge. A veteran of the French and Indian War, Robert Breckinridge served first as Augusta County's undersheriff, then justice of the peace. Soon after John Breckinridge's birth, the family moved to Botetourt County where Robert Breckinridge became a constable and justice of the peace, as well as serving in the local militia. He died in 1773, leaving 12-year-old John Chapter 300 acres of land, 1 slave, and half ownership of another slave. According to his biographer, Lowell H. Harrison, Breckinridge may have attended school, including Augusta Academy, but any records containing this information have been lost. After his father's death, the younger Breckinridge helped support the family by selling whiskey, brandy, and hemp. He learned surveying from his uncle, William Preston, and between 1774 and 1779, he was employed as a recorder in the land office of Fincastle. Preston sought opportunities for his nephew to attend private schools alongside his sons, but such schools were prone to intermittent operation, and Breckinridge's other responsibilities interfered with his attendance. Preston also nominated Breckinridge as Deputy Surveyor of Montgomery County, a position he accepted after passing the requisite exam on February 1, 1780. Later that year, he joined his cousin, future Kentucky Senator John Brown, at William and Mary College. The instructors who influenced him most were Reverend James Madison and George Wythe. The Revolutionary War forced William and Mary to close in 1781, as its buildings were used as barracks for British, French, and American troops as each nation successively controlled the college and surrounding area. Although William C. Davis records that Breckinridge had previously served as an ensign in the Botetourt County militia, Harrison notes that the most reliable records of Virginians' military service do not indicate his participation in the Revolutionary War, but less reliable sources mention him as a subaltern in the Virginia militia. If he enlisted, Harrison speculates that he served in one or two short 1780 militia campaigns supporting Nathaniel Greene's army in southwest Virginia. Early political career. Although he had not sought the office and was not old enough to serve, Breckinridge was elected to represent Botetourt County in the Virginia House of Delegates in late 1780. Legend says he was twice refused his seat because of his age, but his constituents re-elected him each time, and he was seated the third time, but official records do not support this. His legislative colleagues included Patrick Henry, Benjamin Harrison, John Tyler, John Taylor of Caroline, George Nicholas, Daniel Boone, and Benjamin Logan. Prevented by British soldiers from meeting at Williamsburg, the House convened May 7, 1781 in Richmond, but failed to achieve a quorum, because of British General Charles Cornwallis' May 10 advance on that city. The legislators adjourned to Charlottesville on May 24. Breckinridge arrived in Charlottesville on May 28. A quorum was present to conduct legislative business through June 3. The next morning, Jack Jewett rode into the city, warning the legislators that 250 light cavalrymen under banners to Tarleton were approaching. Legislators quickly adjourned to Staunton and fled for the horses. Days later, they completed the session's business there. Breckinridge stayed at his mother's house between sessions, rejoining the legislature in Richmond, Indiana, November 1781. Much of the session consisted of adopting resolutions of thanks for individuals who had made that city safe by defeating Cornwallis at Yorktown. Financial difficulties prevented Breckinridge's return to college. He did not seek re-election in 1782. Instead, he spent a year earning money by surveying, and was re-elected to the House of Delegates in 1783, joining his legislative colleagues in May. He also joined the Constitutional Society of Virginia. Fellow society members included future U.S. Presidents James Madison and James Monroe. The House adjourned June 28, 1783, and Breckinridge returned to William and Mary, studying through the end of the year, accepting the legislative session in November and December. With the war over, he urged that no economic or political penalties be imposed on former Loyalists. In contrast to his later political views, he desired a stronger central government than provided for in the Articles of Confederation. Confederation. He argued that the national government could not survive unless it could tax its citizens, a power it did not have under the Articles. Financial problems caused Breckinridge to leave William and Mary after the spring semester in 1784. Because of his studies earlier in the year, he had no time to campaign for re-election to the House of Delegates, so he asked his brother Joseph and his cousin John Preston to campaign on his behalf. Initially, his prospects seemed favorable, but he was beaten by future Virginia Congressman George Hancock. After the defeat, voters from Montgomery County, where Breckinridge had previously been a surveyor, chose him to represent them in the House. He was appointed to the prestigious committees on propositions and grievances, courts of justice, religion, and investigation of the land officers. His fellow committee members included Henry Tazewell, Carter Henry Harrison, Edward Carrington, Spencer Roane, John Marshall, Richard Bland, and Wilson Carey Nicholas. Inspired by his legislative service, he spent the summer between legislative sessions studying to become a lawyer. The legislative session focused on domestic issues like whether Virginia should establish a tax to benefit religion in the state. Breckinridge was not associated with any denomination, and his writings indicate that he was opposed to such a tax. Instead, he and James Madison secured approval of a religious liberty bill first proposed by Thomas Jefferson over 5 years earlier. The legislature rose on January 7, 1785, and Breckinridge was admitted to the bar later that year, beginning practice in Charlottesville. Marriage and children. On June 28, 1785, Breckinridge married Mary Hopkins Cabell, daughter of Joseph Cabell, a member of the Cabell political family. As a dowry, he received a 400-acre plantation in Albemarle County dubbed the Glebe. 9 children were born to the John and Polly Breckinridge: Letitia Preston, Joseph Cabell, Mary Hopkins, Robert, Mary Ann, John, Robert Jefferson, William Lewis, and James Monroe. Polly, Cabell, and Letitia all fell ill but survived a smallpox epidemic in 1793. However, Mary Hopkins and Robert died. Cabell would later serve as Speaker of the Kentucky House of Representatives and Kentucky's Secretary of State. He was the father of U.S. Vice President John C. Breckinridge. The younger John Breckinridge attended Princeton Theological Seminary, served as chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives, and was president of Oglethorpe College in Georgia. Robert Jefferson was appointed superintendent of public instruction under Governor William Owsley and became known as the father of Kentucky's public education system. William Lewis became a prominent Presbyterian minister, serving as moderator of the Presbyterian General Assembly in 1859 and later as president of Centre College in Danville, Kentucky, and Oakland College in Yale, Mississippi. In 1804, Letitia married Alfred W. Grayson, son of Virginia Senator William Grayson. Alfred Grayson died in 1808, and in 1816, Letitia married Peter Buell Porter, who would later serve as Secretary of War under President John Quincy Adams. The Glebe's profits were barely enough for Breckinridge's growing family. His legal career provided enough money for some comforts but required long hours and difficult work. Patrick Henry regularly represented clients opposite Breckinridge, and John Marshall both referred clients to him and asked him to represent his own clients in his absence. Though still interested in politics, Breckinridge refused to campaign for the people's support. He believed changes were needed to the Articles of Confederation and agreed with much of the proposed U.S. Constitution, but he did not support equal representation of the states in the Senate nor the federal judiciary. Heeding the advice of his brother James and his friend Archibald Stuart, he did not seek election as a delegate to Virginia's ratification convention. Relocation to Kentucky. Breckinridge's half-brothers, Andrew and Robert, moved to Kentucky in 1781, and his brother William followed in 1783. By 1785, Andrew and Robert were trustees of Louisville. Their letters described Kentucky's abundant land and plentiful legal business, in contrast to the crowded bar and scarce unclaimed land in Virginia. By 1788, Breckinridge was convinced that Kentucky offered him more opportunity, and the next year, he traveled west to seek land on which to construct an estate. Although inaccurate reports of his death reached Virginia, he arrived safely in Kentucky on April 15, 1789, and returned to Virginia in June. The following year, he paid £360 for 600 acres along the North Elkhorn Creek about 6 miles from present-day Lexington, Kentucky. The land, purchased from his only sister, Betsy's father-in-law, lay adjacent to land owned by his sister, and in 1792, he purchased an adjacent 1,000 acres, bringing his total holdings in Kentucky to 1,600 acres. After the purchase, he instructed William Russell, a friend already living in Kentucky, to find tenants to lease and improve the land. In February 1792, Breckinridge, a Democratic-Republican, was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives over token opposition. On the date of the election, he wrote to Archibald Stewart, "The people appearing willing to elect, I could have no objection to serve them one winter in Congress." Despite this, he left for Kentucky in March 1793 and resigned without serving a day in Congress, which convened on March 4. He chose the longer but safer route to Kentucky, joining a group of flatboats at Brownsville, Pennsylvania, for the trip down the Monongahela and Ohio rivers to Limestone. His family, along with 25 slaves, arrived in April and established the plantation, Cabellsdale. By the time of Breckinridge's move, he owned 30,000 acres in Kentucky. Domestic life in Kentucky. When he arrived in Kentucky, much of Breckinridge's land was occupied by tenant farmers whose leases had not yet expired. He planted rye and wheat on 20 acres of unleased land and sent 11 slaves and an overseer to clear land for the fall planting. Eventually, his crops at Cabellsdale included corn, wheat, rye, barley, hay, grass seed, and hemp, but he refused to grow tobacco, a major cash crop which he found too vulnerable to overcultivation. He also bred thoroughbred horses, planted an orchard, and practiced law. He engaged in land speculation, particularly in the Northwest Territory, and at various times owned interests in iron and salt works. But these ventures were never very successful. As his plantation became more productive, Breckinridge became interested in ways to sell his excess goods. On August 26, 1793, he became a charter member of the Democratic Society of Kentucky, which lobbied the federal government to secure unrestricted use of the Mississippi River from Spain. Breckinridge was elected chairman. Robert Dodd and John Bradford were chosen as vice chairman, and Thomas Dodd and Thomas Bodley were elected as clerks. Breckinridge authored a tract entitled Remonstrance of the Citizens West of the Mountains to the President and Congress of the United States, and may have also written to the inhabitants of the United States west of the Allegheny and Appalachian Mountains. He pledged funding to French Minister Edmond Charles Genet's proposed military operation against Spain, but Genet was recalled before it could be executed. Although alarmed that frontier settlers might initiate war with Spain, President George Washington made no immediate attempt to obtain use of the Mississippi, which the Society maintained was the natural right of the citizens of this Commonwealth. The resistance of the eastern states, particularly Federalist politicians, caused Breckinridge to reconsider his support of a strong central government. Breckinridge was also concerned with easing overland transport of goods to Virginia. In mid-1795, he, Robert Barr, Elijah Craig, and Harry Tillman formed a committee to raise funds for a road connecting the Cumberland Gap to central Kentucky. Breckinridge was disappointed with the quality of the route, which was finished in late 1796, concluding that the individual maintaining it was keeping most of the tolls instead of using them for the road's upkeep. Breckinridge was also interested in education. Before moving to Kentucky, he accumulated a substantial library of histories, biographies, law and government texts, and classical literature. Frequently, he allowed aspiring lawyers and students access to the library, which was one of the most extensive in the West. He also provided funding for a municipal library in Lexington. His lobbying for a college to be established in Lexington bore fruit with the opening of Transylvania Seminary in 1788. He was elected to the Seminary's Board of Trustees on October 9, 1793, and supported hiring Harry Tillman as president in February 1794 and consolidating the seminary with Kentucky Academy in 1796. Conservatives on the board and in the Kentucky General Assembly forced Tillman, a liberal Unitarian, to resign in 1796, and Breckinridge's enthusiasm for his trusteeship waned. He attended board meetings less frequently and resigned in late 1797. Kentucky Attorney General. Kentucky needed qualified governmental leaders, and on December 19, 1793, Kentucky Governor Isaac Shelby appointed Breckinridge Attorney General. 3 weeks after accepting, he was offered the post of District Attorney for the Federal District of Kentucky, but he declined. Secretary of State Edmund Randolph directed Shelby to prevent French agents in Kentucky from organizing an expedition against Spanish Louisiana. On Breckinridge's advice, Shelby responded that he lacked the authority to interfere. Lack of funding prevented the expedition, but Shelby's non-committal response helped prompt passage of the Neutrality Act of 1794, which outlawed participation by U.S. citizens in such expeditions. In November 1794, the Democratic-Republicans nominated Breckinridge to succeed John Edwards in the U.S. Senate. Federalists were generally unpopular in Kentucky, but the signing of Pinckney's Treaty, which temporarily secured use Kentucky's of the Mississippi River, and Anthony Wayne's expedition against the Indians in the Northwest Territory prompted a surge of support for the federal government in Kentucky. The election's first ballot reflected this, as Federalist candidate Humphrey Marshall received 18 votes to Breckinridge's 16. John Fowler's 8, and 7 votes for the incumbent Edwards. On the runoff ballot, Marshall was elected over Breckinridge by a vote of 28 to 22. Harrison posits that Marshall's incumbency in the General Assembly may have aided his election, but notes that Marshall downplayed its significance. In May 1796, Kentucky's gubernatorial electors convened to choose Shelby's successor. The votes were split among 4 candidates. Frontiersman Benjamin Logan received 21 votes, Baptist minister James Garrard received 17, Thomas Todd received 14, and Breckinridge's cousin, Senator John Brown, received 1. The Kentucky Constitution did not specify whether a plurality or a majority was required for election, but the electors held a runoff vote. Most of Todd's supporters voted for Garrard, and he won the election. Breckinridge claimed he had no authority to intervene but declared that, as a private citizen, he believed Logan should be governor. The state Senate was authorized to settle disputed elections, but they, too, refused to intervene. Breckinridge resigned as Attorney General on November 30. 1797, the extension of the Attorney General's duties to include representing the state in federal district court as well as the Kentucky Court of Appeals, and reluctance to serve under Garrard after publicly declaring he had no right to his office may have contributed to the decision. A month later, he declared his candidacy to fill a vacancy in the Fayette County delegation to the Kentucky House of Representatives. Of the 1,323 votes cast, he garnered 594, the most of any of the 6 candidates in the race.